The fortunes of war favoured Hrothgar. Friends and kinsmen flocked to his ranks, young followers, a force that grew to be a mighty army. So his mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall, meant to be a wonder of the world forever.
Powerful men like to have impressive houses built. This was as true 1,000 years ago as it is today.
They marched in step, hurrying on till the timbered hall rose before them, radiant with gold. Nobody on earth knew of another building like it. Majesty lodged there. Its light shone over many lands.
You're listening to the 4th episode of The Road to Archaeotourism, a podcast series about the complementary possibilities of tourism and archaeology in the Baltic region. In this series, we focus on the activities of ArchaeoBalt, an investigative EU project started up to create a blueprint for archaeotourism in the South Baltic. The project is a collaboration involving cultural institutions in 3 countries. Gdansk University is a project leader, and the partners are the Museum of Gdansk, Bornholm Museum, and the University of Aarhus and Lund University. The ArchaeoBalt project was conducted at 5 archaeological test sites in Denmark, Sweden, and Poland. We began this episode on a lyrical note with Irish poet Seamus Heaney, reading a few lines from his translation of the epic poem Beowulf, one of the cornerstones of English literature. The manuscript of the original Old English text is from around the year 1000, and this passage is considered a contemporary description of an Iron Age power centre. In our previous episode, we looked at the archaeological site Smøringe, with its mysterious images found on small gold foil figures known as gullgubbar. In this episode, we continue our journey along the road of Iron Age myths and imagination as we travel to Uppåkra in southern Sweden. Today, Uppåkra, meaning high fields, is a tiny village about 5 kilometers south of the town of Lund, in the Swedish province of Gotland. It was also the home and province of the epic hero Beowulf, according to the Beowulf poem. Beowulf probably never existed, but if he did, it's highly probable that he was familiar with the Uppåkra settlement, and he might even have lived there, because the Iron Age Uppåkra was a power centre of the first magnitude, with an influential reach extending throughout Scania and Gotland. The settlement was founded in the 1st century BC, reached the height of its power around the year 500, and declined shortly before the year 1000, when the centre of power in Scania shifted to Lund. It's hard to prove that the throne of Gotland was actually situated in Uppåkra, but it's certainly a possibility. Before we come to the archaeological site in Uppåkra, let's look at the mythical world of Beowulf. In the poem, the hero Beowulf arrives in Denmark to help King Hrothgar get rid of the monster Grendel, who roams his great mead hall at night and kidnaps the king's men to eat them in its lair. Beowulf and his band of warriors arrive. They approach the king's massive hall, radiant with gold, ready to fulfill their mission. After killing both the monster and its mother, even more frightening than Grendel himself, Beowulf returns to his king and cousin, Hygelac, in Geatland, and is given a hall of his own. The hero, Beowulf, may not have been a real person, but King Hygelac is referred to in other medieval texts. So he could have been a historical figure. He's supposed to have died around 521 AD, when Uppåkra was a major regional powerhouse. Therefore, it's not impossible that Hygelac's place of residence was indeed Uppåkra. So, Beowulf is a poem about a Swedish hero fighting a monster in Denmark in the 6th century. The surviving manuscript was written close to 500 years later, at the turn of a new millennium. At that time, a Germanic presence had been dominant in parts of England for 200 years or so, which would explain why an epic poem with Scandinavian settings was written in Anglo-Saxon English, perhaps from a long oral tradition.
Beowulf has been used extensively for recreating a vivid image of how life could be in these residences, where you have the retinue, the hird, and the chieftain, the powerful warrior, and that is probably contemporary, so it's pretty much the truth.
Mats Roslund, professor of archaeology and executive editor of antiquities at Lund University, is one of the two leaders of the excavations and archaeological research in Uppåkra. Roslund points out that the epic poem Beowulf has often been used as a point of reference to settlements like the one in Uppåkra. The epic also inspired many elements of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, such as in the chapter The King of the Golden Hall, where Gandalf the wizard leads Gimli the dwarf, Legolas the elf, and Aragorn, the last descendant of a long line of human kings, to the town of Edoras, passing by several burial mounds before reaching the Golden Hall on top of a hill. It's an image Roslund himself likes to use to give a sense of what Uppåkra might have been like.
Tolkien is really good in using his knowledge from his scholarly work at university, and he's really fond of the Anglo-Saxons, like all English are. And but that's a good picture. I like to use that because it's very close to how Uppåkra was. Edoras with a position very high, a bit away from the settlement itself, but still on the road to the high settlement. And on the highest point, you have the whole building. And then around it, farms, people working, blacksmiths, and with a possibility to have visual contact with the landscape around us. Like we stand here today, you can see the hills several kilometers away, and feel that this is, from here where I stand, over to that place, is our land, our dynasty.
The settlement in Uppåkra had a certified connection to the settlements on Bornholm, the focus of our previous episodes, especially the one at Sordemull. The main difference between the sites is that where the Bornholm sites are still in the initial stages of archaeological research, the Uppåkra site has been extensively excavated for 2.5 decades. There's simply much more information available.
Så går ni ner för trappan när ni har tagit av er skorna så att alla kommer in.
As we arrive in Uppåkra, some of this information is being shared with a group of children visiting Uppåkra's archaeology school.
Linda, vad är detta för något? Det är en liten figur som kallas för Völund. Ska vi ta det allihopa?
What's this? One of the children asks Linda Spanier, their guide to Uppåkra's past, pointing at a small, intricate statuette on display that seems to depict a flying man. This is Volund, the winged man, Linda replies. He comes from an almost 1,000-year-old story. He was a smith who was kidnapped by a king and forced to make beautiful weapons and jewellery. We'll return to the figure of Volund, or Wayland, as he's called in English. For now, let's point out that the children's experience at the Archaeology Field School is a prime example of what archaeotourism is all about. Here we are at an archaeological site where actual finds are being used to give visitors a direct view into the past. Uppåkra is an unobtrusive spot in the Swedish countryside, a small compound of houses around a beautiful stone church. It's impossible to see any vestiges of its past glory. The Uppåkra settlement was founded around the year AD 100 and remained a centre of power and ritual in the region until 980, when the King of Denmark established the new city of Lund, just a few kilometres away. The history of Lund is well documented, but the story of Uppåkra slumbered on top of the hill for over 1,000 years. The true importance of Uppåkra was not known to anyone until a flock of men with a mission arrived on a chilly afternoon in April 1996. Local farmers driving by might have turned their heads as a group of 12 men dressed in boiler suits emerged from 2 minivans and stepped out onto the dark brown fields of Uppåkra.
And we started up like soldiers. We coming out from the cars and we put our metal detector together, click, 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 and earphones on the head, and we're ready. And go out to this black soil with bone pieces all over and pottery pieces all over, and Lars Larsson, he say, go.
Lars Larsson was, and still is, a professor of archaeology at the University of Lund, and the men in boiler suits were amateur archaeologists from Bornholm. Swedish law does not allow laymen to look for archaeological finds with metal detectors, so when volunteers were needed to map out the archaeological potential of Uppåkra, Lars Larsson invited a group of the most dedicated metal detector enthusiasts on Bornholm to pay a visit with their detectors. One of them was Claus Thorsen.
The first minutes, 2 minutes, bang, bang, bang. Fantastic found. And we look at each other and we think, oh, whoa, what is this for a place? Because we didn't know it. Nobody knew what Uppåkra was before we started up.
The troop rendered each find visible by marking it with a disposable plastic spoon. By Sunday, the search area was like a flowering field of white spoons, each one marking a small plastic bag with a find for the archaeologists to study.
Lars Larsson, he called the institute in Lund in the evening with telephone and say that we have found 300-400 thing, gold, coins, weapons, all kinds of Iron Age, Viking Age material in very good condition, and they think that he had drank too much beer. They think he's very drunk because they don't believe him.
Luckily, the finds were real, and concurrent with the archaeological research, the troop from Bornholm returned every spring in their boiler suits over the next decade. Armed with metal detectors, they helped put Uppåkra on the map. Over the following years, Uppåkra's history slowly emerged from the past. The settlement was well established around AD 2 to 300 during the Roman Iron Age. The Iron Age in general is categorized according to the use of tools and weapons made of iron, replacing the bronze instruments of the Bronze Age. In the initial centuries, Rome was a dominant power center with widespread influence in Scandinavia. Uppåkra began as the base of one of many small tribes in Scania with limited regional reach. But soon there was a shift in the social structure, a concentration of power, with an emerging elite that had direct connections to Rome. Rulers of new power centers such as Uppåkra had personal connections to Rome with mutual exchanges of gifts and trade contacts, and they had an understanding of Roman customs. Some members may even have spoken Latin. The close connection to Rome can make it easier to understand and interpret the archaeological data in Uppåkra. The layout of Uppåkra, like other Iron Age power centres, closely resembles a Roman settlement, and the two central buildings are both modelled on two types of Roman houses, the hall and the temple. But the Roman Empire began to disintegrate already in the 4th century. Germanic tribes became dominant in Europe in a new phase of the Iron Age, beginning with the great upheaval of the migration period and extending into the late Germanic Iron Age, called the Vendel period in Sweden. At that point, the rulers of Uppåkra formed bonds with a new powerful ally in the south, the Merovingian dynasty, that eventually ruled not only most of the territory that is now modern France, but also large sections of modern Austria, Germany and Italy. Uppåkra survived as a seat of power. The excavations in Uppåkra can give us an idea of how this settlement looked in its heyday. Let's look around with the help of Mats Roslund.
So what you see is in this open landscape on a very, very soft slope, a hill, a conglomeration of farms very close to each other. Unusual for the landscape. Most of the farms, they were clutched together, a few of them, but up there could be 40, 50 farms and a special, smaller but very, very intricately carved building, which was the temple, and the large residence building, much, much bigger than all of the other houses, maybe 40, 50 meters long, with its broad side towards you when you come up the hill. And it will be a hustle and bustle with people in the eastern part of the settlement. There will be artisans. You can hear the blacksmith working. You see the fumes coming out of the smithy, and you can see all the cattle being driven into the farms.
As Roslund indicates, the hall was the settlement's biggest building. The hall, as a structure, emerges in Scandinavia near the end of the Roman Iron Age. It's basically a wooden version of a Roman house type called a basilica. But the Nordic hall was much more specialized. It was the ruler's residence, but a place for ceremonies as well, especially ritual drinking. Animals were slaughtered during the ceremonies, and the blood and some of the meat seemed to have been sacrificed to the gods, while the rest of the meat was cooked and eaten. The hall and its ceremonies are obviously modelled on Valhalla, where the warriors killed in battle feasted with the gods in the Old Norse religion. Close to the hall was the cult house or temple. Cult houses emerged near the end of the Roman Iron Age and marked a shift in religious customs. During the Bronze Age, religious activities were conducted at natural sites of worship, such as wetlands and bogs. Those places were gradually abandoned and replaced with these cult houses that resembled the Roman temple. The cult house in Uppåkra was established in the 3rd century and rebuilt every century or so. It was a stave building, 13 meters long, 6.5 meters wide. It was relatively small in extent, but had 4 unusually thick central roof-bearing poles embedded in deep post holes. This enabled the building to be much taller than standard Iron Age houses, possibly up to 6 meters high. So anyone approaching the Uppåkra settlement would see the cult house towering up from the landscape right next to the massive hall. The finds from within the temple and its immediate surroundings include tiny gold foils with stamped figures, the guldgrube we talked about so much in our 2 previous episodes. A few of them are identical to the guldgrube found at Sorte Muld, proving that the 2 Iron Age settlements were strongly interconnected. These 2 buildings, the hall and the temple, were the centre of cult festivities and rituals on certain days of the year.
I think there was a real wildlife here during midsummer in the Iron Age, at least from the Roman Iron Age and onwards, to be sure that the year would turn and give give you crops again. If you were coming during that period of rituals around the midsummer solstice, there will be a lot of people here. Up on the hill you can see how people were gathering to maybe during this special day open up the doors of the temple, so even those who are not allowed to get into the house of the gods could have a little glimpse of those golden gold foil figures on the pillars inside. It would be very dark inside, and they open up only the 2 doors. Some people might even have the possibility to go in through the west door and pass by the gods and go out through the east door. We don't know, but some kind of processions also could be used.
Finds discovered close to these 2 buildings include a large quantity of weapons, ritually deposited over a long period of time in a depression north of the temple, showing that the rulers of Uppåkra put great emphasis on their military power.
Also what you see when you come are young men fighting, training to be warriors. To be a good warrior and in any task which takes performance, you have to train every day. So we have been thinking about the weapons we've been finding here, and also the spears and lances and everything. But they were used by people. They were not just to show off or to flash them in public.
The weapons deposited in Uppåkra were intentionally destroyed. The tips of the spears and lances have been bent, the shields hacked to pieces. This kind of treatment points at some sort of ritual. A special detail in Uppåkra is that human skeletons have been found among the warriors' gear. This seems to indicate that these individuals were either sacrificed or placed among the weapons as part of a ritual. What kind of ritual? We can only guess, but surely the deposition of weapons was a final event. Ritual drinking and feasting probably played a big part in the ceremony, possibly incantations, music, dance, dramatic presentations, even ritual combats. Perhaps a procession of people carried the weapons out of the building to the site where they were ritually destroyed. Most of what went on left no material evidence for archaeologists to interpret. But one thing seems certain. Cult activity and power were intertwined at Uppåkra.
You can have possession of wealth, of gold, you can have strength as warriors, but if you don't have possession of people's minds, you can't do anything. That is the reason why Uppåkra have a special position. Not only that it's positioned here on a height, but it's also that you never discuss the right to have the power if you sit up here. Of course, there were struggles between different dynasties. We have found the remains of dead people in a house that was burnt and then left without being used again.
The most likely explanation for this would be a violent coup, in which the new ruler murdered the old one. But the incident does not seem to have had any lasting effect on the settlement.
The ideological basis that lingers on here is ancienity. That even if you have a new dynasty on top, you have a usurper who comes and take everything and starts anew. It's very important also for them to claim the right to it, that they are actually inheriting something, that they are probably also a part of the same family or the same god, the line of the same god. That was extremely important. And why do I believe that? Because the longevity of the rituals and the cult house. Your grandmother, your grandmother's grandfather have been talking about this house, this cult house, through time. It's in your own story, in your own life story. You know it's been there before you were born, and it will be there before and after you're dead.
The archaeological centre at Uppåkra is mostly situated out in the open. Posters, illustrations, pictures and descriptions of finds have been placed along a recently laid path, starting at the stone church dominating the hill. Wooden poles mark the 4 large posts that supported the roof of the temple. and a downscaled version of the temple has been erected in front of the church. There is an archaeological field school and a small exhibition room with replicas of some of the most important finds. Each year, more than 5,000 local schoolchildren visit the center.
Här ute så använder vi en hel del repliker, och det gör vi därför att barnen och vuxna för den delen ska kunna komma hit och se fynden riktigt nära.
Linda Spanier from the Uppåkra Archaeological Center explains how visitors get a hands-on experience of archaeology. Detailed replicas of archaeological finds are placed in sandboxes where children practice digging them up. And in the small underground exhibition room, both children and adults have the opportunity to touch the objects. As Linda's colleague Sophia explains, this manner of engaging and educating the schoolchildren is not just for entertainment.
Det här är vår historia. Barnen är vår framtid. Så att det gäller ju också att få med dem på tåget, att förstå värdet av kulturarv, så att de blir liksom kulturminnesvårdare för framtiden också.
The big perspective is that the children get to know the history, that this is our history, that the history belongs to them. Sophia says, children are our future and our aim is to get them on board as protectors of our cultural heritage. Of course, the children visiting the Uppåkra Archaeological Center have heard about the pagan gods of the Viking Age, Odin and the rest. But this pagan mythology is mainly preserved in texts written in the 13th century, 200 years after Uppåkra had sunk into oblivion. Is it certain that the inhabitants of Uppåkra worshipped these gods, and did they know some of the mythological stories that were written down those many years later? Is there any proof of that? Actually, yes. Among the finds at Uppåkra is a statuette of a one-eyed male figure with a raven on each shoulder. There is little doubt that it depicts Odin. And then there's the statuette of Voland, which one of the visiting children asked about earlier in this episode.
The Völund symbol was found just outside the eastern end of the house, on cobblestones, going towards the entrance in the southwest in that cult house.
The Voland figure found in Uppåkra is a small, intricately designed statuette, perhaps originally fitted to the lid of a wooden casket. It depicts a human figure seen from above, flying with the aid of artificial wings and tail. 4 drops of blood on the left wing confirm that the figure refers to the legend of Voland the Smith, cited in various medieval sources. Made out of a gilded copper alloy, like many finds in Uppåkra and from the Merovingian period, it is small enough to fit into the palm of an adult's hand. Yet it depicts in delicate, harmonious details the flying man facing downwards but looking up, straining his neck at an impossible angle, the wings attached to his arms and the feathered tail between his legs, bent at the knees.
He is actually a well-known mythical figure in the whole northwestern Germanic world. Weiland and Völund in different name forms from the Anglo-Saxon British Islands, in Germany and in Scandinavia. And we can see that his story is told on Gotlandic picture stones.
The myth of this flying man is a harsh one. It tells of Voland, the most famous smith of the north. He's waiting for his beloved, a Valkyrie who's flown off in the guise of a swan, and then he's captured by King Nidod. The king holds Voland prisoner on a small island and forces him to make jewelry. The smith's tendons are cut to prevent him from escaping, but Voland plots a terrible revenge. He murders the king's 2 young sons and rapes the king's daughter, impregnating her. After confessing all this to the king, Voland flies away on a pair of wings he's constructed. In one version of this story, his brother pretends to shoot him in flight with a bow and arrow, but aims and hits a pouch filled with blood that Voland holds in his armpit.
In the Archibald project, together with the Historical Museum, we have made a small movie about the Völund story, a cartoon.
The figure of Völund will be used as a symbol for an ambitious new research project at Uppåkra called Hallen på höjden, the hall on the hill.
We are taking off the nasty parts because there are really, really bloody things going on in that story and make it more palatable for younger people. But he is a strong symbol, and he made those wings and flew away. And we see him as a symbol for us to lift above the ground and to achieve something we didn't believe we could achieve. And I think together with my colleague Torbjörn Ahlström, we are on our way upwards to achieve that goal.
This was the 4th episode of The Road to Archaeotourism about Uppåkra in Scania, southern Sweden. In the next episode, we move from the lands and legends of the Norsemen across the Baltic Sea to the Slavic stronghold of Ovich, situated in northern Poland. The Road to Archaeotourism was written and produced by Jon Haller Steffensen and Lars Römer for Archaeobelt Project. Anja Lillemelium played the cello and our narrator was Tim Hinman. Thank you for listening. The Archaeobelt Project is co-financed by European Development Fund with the Interreg South Baltic Programme 2014 to 2020. And by the programme of the Minister of Science and Higher Education entitled PMW 2014 to 2020/2021/2.